Back to school. The smell of sharpened pencils, the excitement of new books, the smiling faces of your new classroom family. There is something very special about the start of a brand new school year. Although I truly love back to school season, despite mourning the loss of my summer break, it can also be somewhat stressful. For those of you that have been following this podcast for some time, you know that I feel very strongly about the first 2 weeks of school, not including curriculum and not targeting grade level standards. However, this doesn't mean that students shouldn't be learning at all. The first 2 weeks of school should focus on getting to know your students, SEL or social emotional learning, routines and procedures, and setting up your classroom for success. In this podcast episode, we will learn how to train your students in some key literacy practices that you can use in both your whole group and small group instruction throughout the school year. The best part, these literacy practices are manageable. Yes, you heard me, manageable ways to target the science of reading in really any subject area. The first thing we're going to start with is the why. Now, over the years, I have had countless conversations with teachers, both primary and upper grade, regarding the schedule of the first 2 weeks of school. Several teachers often make the argument that curriculum must begin as soon as possible simply because there are way too many standards to teach. And trust me, trying to fit every standard into a school year, or in the case of upper grades before state testing begins, is next to impossible. However, this doesn't take away from the fact that if your classroom runs like a well-oiled machine, you will definitely be getting more bang for your buck. For me, I put a ton of time and energy into training my class for every single part of the day. I train them for group work, how to rotate through centers, how to take notes, how to actively listen during instruction, how to participate in class discussions, both teacher-led and student-led, how to get out their supplies. The list goes on and on. The better the training, the more smoothly my future lessons will go. It's as simple as that. This has been true no matter what grade I've taught and no matter what the class dynamics have been. Another question I've been asked in the past is why I don't just teach these routines at the same time that I begin curriculum. And the answer is simple: cognitive overload. Think back to when you learned how to drive a car. Now imagine trying to drive for the first time without knowing the rules of the road. Operating a car while simultaneously learning what the lights and signs mean is a recipe for disaster. And the same goes for students in a new classroom. Asking kids to learn new skills and standards while also learning their new teacher's expectations is truly overwhelming. Therefore, new routines and procedures should be taught and practiced with skills the kids are already familiar with, such as character traits and how to be successful in school. SEL, or social emotional learning, is ideal for practicing these new routines and procedures because for most school-aged kids, they've been taught these type of skills time and time again. Before getting into the science of reading specifics, let's look at a sample schedule for the first 2 weeks of school and answer a question that many of you are asking yourselves, and that's how. How can we possibly plan for the first 2 weeks of school without using curriculum and still make it a valuable time of the year? So, what I do first is when planning for these first 2 weeks, I think about what routines would help my classroom run smoothly during my lessons. And those are the routines that I teach and practice before beginning curriculum. This process does not need to be stressful or daunting. In fact, it's completely manageable if you break it down into just a couple of steps. The first step is I separate the routines and procedures into two basic categories: classroom routines and then lesson routines. I then spread out these routines amongst the first 2 weeks. Now, I tend to emphasize classroom routines during the first week of school and lesson routines during the second. Classroom routines consist of day to day activities, such as entering and exiting the classroom, gathering school supplies, and keeping our classroom clean and organized. Now, if you're looking for some go to classroom routines, make sure you check out my podcast episode on the 10 must teach classroom routines that are going to help you during this back to school season. I also have a blog post on the same topic. So make sure to check that out if you're looking for a starting point. Now, when you're teaching these routines, it is absolutely critical to not just tell the students what to do, but allow time for them to practice it. I would even have volunteers model examples and non examples. First of all, it gets the students up and out of their seats. It allows the class to analyze expected versus unexpected behaviors. And quite frankly, it's kind of fun. Now, lesson routines, on the other hand, are skills that are needed to be successful in various subjects. For me, I tend to focus on literacy routines as they can be incorporated into any subject. The skills I focus on are the skills needed for my science of reading warm up, more on that later, thinking maps, note taking, listening and speaking skills, depth and complexity icons, and how to rotate during small group learning. So now that we've talked a little bit about my process, I want to dive into the what. In other words, what makes up the plans for the first 2 weeks of school? And this is really going to be the bread and butter of what we talk about today. So when planning for those first 2 weeks, like I mentioned before, I think about the routines that would help me, and then I separate those routines into each week. Now, in order to better understand my process and the plans that I've put together, I do want to take a moment and kind of describe or define some of the jargon that are in them. As always, if you want to know more or have specific questions, reach out to me. You can email me. You can send a direct message on Instagram, Learning in Progress. There's a lot of ways to get a hold of me. And I am more than happy to help. Now, the first term that I want to go over before sharing the free plans, yes, I said it, free plans I have for you. The first term is what I consider in my classroom our morning routine. So when I tell my students that we're going to do morning routine, or even better, when they see it on the board, they know exactly what I mean. Upon entering the classroom, students unpack their bags and they start their morning work right away. Now, they know when they enter the room that they're allowed to say good morning to each other, use whisper voices, but as soon as they hear that classical music start to play, they automatically know that voices need to be off. Now, the morning work that I have each day is typically ongoing practice. Occasionally, it'll be like a worksheet or exit ticket of a skill that I know we need to work on as a class, but it's typically things that we're just going to practice continuously. They're often skills or activities on my extra time or ET chart, which I'll explain later. But the kids have something at their desk that they can work on quietly and independently. Now, while they're working on the morning work, there's a couple options if you choose to do this morning routine. One is the students can excuse themselves to go to the attendance board and check themselves in, put their backpacks away, etc. Another option is the teacher or a class president, a teacher's assistant can dismiss each individual table. But no matter what you choose, at some point, students need to check themselves in so that attendance can be quick and easy, and then they put away their supplies or turn in their homework. Now, after they do all of that, for the students that have class jobs that need to be done in the morning, this is also a good time for them to do it. So for me, often I'll have my teacher's assistant let me know who's absent for the day. You might have a student in charge of attendance. There's a few different things. Whoever is in charge of maybe saying the Pledge of Allegiance, the choice is yours. And again, while students are working, I have classical music playing that tells them their voices are to be off. Once I'm ready for us to move on, I turn off that music and turn on the transition music. If you're curious how I use music in my classroom, I also have a podcast episode on that. You can either look at the routines podcast episode I mentioned earlier, or there's actually a summer episode that's specifically about ideas that I've learned from other professionals and books that I've read specifically on classroom management. Now, the second vocab or jargon, if you will, is TPR or total physical response. And when you see the free plans I mentioned earlier, you're going to see this very often because I really hit this hard the first 2 weeks. I use this great vocabulary strategy during every single read aloud I do throughout the year. Picture books are absolutely the way to go, but you can also use chapter books with the same skill. First, I preview a book, often do a picture walk or some kind of book preview with the students. And during this time, new words are introduced. As a class, we decide on motions that represent what those new words mean. And as soon as students hear those words during the read aloud, they repeat the word and do the motion. Now, as you're doing this read aloud, I suggest having some kind of teacher signal that tells the class it's time to repeat the word so they can repeat it at the same time. For me, I take my hand and put it up to my ear. That's how they know they're expected to respond in that moment. Now, the next term I want to go over is my Science of Reading warm-up. This is something that I've come up with using my knowledge of the science of reading. And honestly, it's a game changer, especially upper grade teachers out there. If you're looking for a quick and easy way to address the science of reading without having to have hours and hours of extra lessons, this should be your go-to for any subject. So basically what happens is at the start of each lesson, I have some kind of big idea. It could be a writing prompt. It could be the question they're expected to answer for their exit ticket, but there's some kind of statement or question that sums up the main idea of the lesson. What we then do is we identify either words with phonics sounds that we already know, especially if I was teaching primary, or we identify new vocabulary for both primary or upper. And then we practice reading that question or statement out loud. So literally in about 3 minutes, you can practice phonics, vocab, and fluency for this big idea for your lesson. We then use the vocabulary to talk about which graphic organizers are most appropriate to organize our thinking in order for us to be able to answer this question. Boom, we just got comprehension in there. So you can see that you can use this for literally any lesson, any subject, any grade level, and you're tying in the science of reading into your lessons throughout the day. Now, if you want to read specifics about what this looks like, I have, again, a blog post dedicated to this. I also have a podcast episode, and it is entitled Science of Reading in Real Life. So make sure you check it out. Next, I want to hit depth and complexity icons. These icons are meant to help students organize their thinking while encouraging them to critically think about the topic at hand. Originally, there were 11 icons. Now, I talk about these original 11 in, yeah, you guessed it, another episode and another blog post. And they were originally meant for advanced learners, but they can honestly be used for any lesson that you teach. It's just a great way for students to think about thinking. The next term I want to go over that you'll see in the free plans I have for you, mix and mingle. Now, this is a speaking and listening strategy that is both fast and easy to manage. For me, I like to use music within this activity. I use a 30-second song for the transition and then a 1-minute song for the sharing portion. When the 30-second song plays, students walk around the classroom and find another student in the room to have a quick 1-minute discussion with. They talk until the music stops, making sure that each one of them has a turn to share. Now, make sure you tell the students the sharing question before starting the music. It makes for a much smoother process. Once they've shared, the 30-second song comes on again while the students find a new partner. And this can continue for as long as you want. Now, I recommend having some kind of signal, such as a bell, maybe teacher raises his or her hand, something that informs students that the next time the 30-second song plays, they're actually expected to return to their seats rather than find a new partner. So think about how you want to signal to your students that it's time to return. And again, if you want to learn other ways that I use music in my classroom, make sure you check out that podcast episode because I literally use music all day long. Next, I want to talk about a gallery walk. I love me a good gallery walk. It's a strategy that can be used for any subject. It allows students to walk around the room and either participate in small group discussions or add to class graphic organizers. This fosters collaboration and engagement. I recommend using music, again, you guessed it, to aid with transitions. When I introduce thinking maps, for instance, I use a large anchor chart for every single type of thinking map that we learn, and I place those anchor charts around the room. Then I turn on the music, students walk to one of those charts with their own marker, and they add their notes to that class thinking map. The beauty of this strategy is that students are able to both share their own thoughts and read the ideas of others without having to volunteer answers in front of the entire class. Now, I have found that this is especially helpful for students who are learning English as a second language or for students who are a bit timid. Another strategy that you'll see in those first 2-week plans, math games. I know focus on literacy, but when it comes to math education, I'm a strong advocate for learning games, particularly math games. It is easier and far more engaging to learn through play rather than rote memorization. So therefore, I believe that math fluency comes from playing dice games or card games rather than solely using flashcards. Plus, by including math games into your math block, you will see your student engagement soar. Having said that, getting students to set up and clean up math games on their own does require quite a bit of training, and that does not matter what grade level you teach, you need to train your students. So in my classroom, I set up for every math game we play, and I make sure that in those bins, they have instructions for how to play, how to set up, and how to clean up, along with any supplies that they might need. Every time I teach the class a new game, I teach them in a small group so that I can have them practice in front of me. That's actually the lesson for the day, and you'll see that reflected in my 2-week plans. I take an entire day just to teach a math game in small groups. This way, when I'm with a different group, perhaps the next day, I can count on students to play the math games on their own without needing to ask me a million questions. Now, last but not least, I do want to talk about a task board. This is absolutely my bread and butter for small group learning. This is where the magic happens. Students are placed into differentiated groups based on level, skill, or learning modality, and each group has assigned tasks for that day. Now, please note this is not the same as the station rotation model. Although there is nothing wrong with rotating through centers, I have actually found more success with using task boards because it allows me wiggle room to meet more often with the students who need me the most. You do not need to meet with every student the same amount of time. Please let that sink in. Trust me, it's a game changer. If you're curious about how I specifically run my small group math, as an upper grade teacher, I do teach small group math every single day. Make sure you check out my podcast episode and my blog, and I will walk you through it. Now, I'm hoping that you are feeling more confident and prepared as you go into your first 2 weeks of the school year. Again, I did promise you free plans. Please make sure that you go on to learninginprogress.com/blog because I literally have 2 tables. I took my planner, I put it online, and it's yours to use. So if you want to check that out, make sure that you look at learninginprogress.com/blog because it's all laid out for you. If you're looking for additional ways to include literacy instruction, build classroom community, incorporate SEL, use icebreakers, make sure you check out my other back to school podcast episodes and or the blog posts. I often include freebie downloads on the blog to go along with these topics. Now, the next time we get together, we're going to continue our journey into the science of reading, but this time we are going to dive into how to pre-assess our students and place them into differentiated small groups. The blog post for that topic will be available on August 24th, and the podcast episode will air on August 25th. Until then, make sure to check out our other Science of Reading posts and episodes. And I cannot wait to continue our literacy journey together in just a couple of weeks. Until I see you again, until we meet again, make sure to always keep learning.